Have you ever heard of Senolytics? It's the latest breakthrough in aging and longevity science that I honestly hadn't heard about until I had an email about our next guest, whose work I'm familiar with. I'm a huge fan of Neurohacker Collective that was founded in 2015 with a mission of creating best-in-class well-being products. And I've been following their work for years to learn anything and everything possible about biohacking. We've even quoted Heather Sandison, a medical advisor and podcast host with Neurohacker Collective, on our HRV episode. One quick look at their About Us section on their website, and I saw many of the leaders, innovators in health, longevity, and wellness from around the world, and quite a few who we've interviewed, like Dr. Anna Lemke from episode 162, Dr. Stickler from episode 96, and Dr. Viusage from episode 93. And in their collective insights section, you'll see many names we quote often, like Dr. Andrew Huberman, Deepak Chopra, Dale Bredesen, David Rabin, Bruce Lipton, Michael Gelb, Jim Quick, and I could go on and on here. These are the leaders and innovators in the field of health, wellness, and biohacking. This is going to be a phenomenal episode. I'm so excited. And with that, I want to welcome you back to the Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning podcast, where we cover the science-based evidence behind social and emotional learning for schools, emotional intelligence training in the workplace, with tools, ideas, and strategies that we can all use for immediate results with our brain in mind. I'm Andrea Samadi, an author and an educator with a passion for learning, specifically on the topics of health, well-being, and productivity, and launched this podcast to share how important an understanding of our brain is for our everyday life and results using the most current research. If there's a tool, strategy, or resource that I find that could be helpful to improve productivity and results, whether we're a teacher in the classroom, a coach, or in the modern workplace, I'll share it with you here. On today's episode number 285, we'll be speaking with Dr. Gregory Kelly, the Director of Product Development at Neurohacker Collective. He's a naturopathic physician and the author of the book Shapeshift, the Shape Intelligence Solution, that's all about getting healthy while creating your ideal shape. As I was researching for this episode, I couldn't help thinking, how in the earth did I miss this topic of Senolytics? Because I'm always looking for anything new when it comes to productivity, health, and wellness hacks. While preparing for this episode, the Neurohacker Collective team was extremely helpful. Tina Gammon, their marketing manager, sent me the trio package of Qualia Senolytic for vision, night, and mind, and you can see it right behind me on my desk. And I'll be sharing the immediate results that I felt with the night and then the mind products with a level of clarity that I've never felt before. I haven't yet tried the vision one, but I've got lots of questions to ask Dr. Kelly about it today. So hang tight, because on today's science-packed episode, we'll dive deep into this cutting-edge topic with the latest anti-aging research, where we'll cover what is cellular senescence, what are the hallmarks of aging, and why is cellular senescence an important hallmark, the difference between cellular senescence and autophagy, with a quick review of 9th grade science with mitosis. We'll look at classical places where senescent cells take hold in the body, and the science to support Senolytics from the Mayo Clinic and Scripps Institute. We'll look at exactly how does Senolytics work, the correct way to dose Senolytics, and what makes their Qualia Senolytic a groundbreaking supplement in the longevity space. Before we get to our questions, I want to share a little bit about Dr. Kelly. He has extensive experience in both natural medicine and nutrition and has been an influential figure in this field. He has served as the editor of the Journal of Alternative Medicine Review and taught advanced clinical nutrition, counseling skills, and doctor-patient relationships at the University of Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine. Dr. Kelly has also published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition, contributed 3 chapters to the textbook of natural medicine, and has over 30 journal articles indexed on PubMed, where we spend a lot of time on this podcast diving into. His areas of expertise include nootropics, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine, weight management, sleep, and the chronobiology of performance and health. Additionally, he's helped develop several rare and powerful compounds that have scientifically shown senolytic activity and which have a wider range of mechanisms than existing senolytic supplements available. Before I get lost in my words on this topic, let's meet Dr. Gregory Kelly and see what we can learn today to open our eyes to something new in this ever-changing field of science, health, and longevity. Welcome, Dr. Gregory Kelly. Thank you so much for being here on a Friday night. And I'm just curious, before I get to the questions, with your background, what would you typically be doing on a Friday night? And I'm just imagining you hanging out with Dr. Stickler and Dr. Andrew Huberman, formulating your next product. You know, what would your typical Friday night look like for you?
So they don't live anywhere near me. Dr. Stickler is over in Austin most of the time, I believe now. But
Okay.
I live right on the ocean in a town called Oceanside,
Okay.
California. It's in the furthest north you can basically get in San Diego County. And I live just across from the ocean. So Friday night, like honestly, and it's what I'm gonna do when we finish recording, is do you know the X3 bar by Jaquish? That it's a heavy duty strap. So I'll go out and watch the sunset and do that exercise.
Oh,
And I most nights do it doing a FaceTime video with a friend in Santa Barbara. So we, support
wow.
each other to do that workout.
That's so
And
much.
then and watch the sunset. So I feel
Oh.
like, I'm in a great location for that. So I try to take advantage of it.
Well, that sounds beautiful. I absolutely love it. Exercise and then end your day that way. And I'm just grateful that I get this opportunity to learn with you tonight. I'm so excited for this. I'm thrilled to have you today.
Thanks. It's my pleasure. I love talking about this subject. So I can't wait to get started.
Perfect. Well, can we just start with the basics here? I watched your interview with Dave Asprey because he's been promoting your new Qualia product that we'll be talking about today. It's behind me. It came in the mail, and I'm just so excited to talk about what I've experienced with it. But I've mentioned that, he's talking about it all over the place. And I watched his interview that you did with him, and he's got such a creative mind. I loved how he asked you, why did you call your company Neurohacker Collective? What a great question to open up with. Could we start
Yeah,
there?
names, especially for a new company, is such a challenge. But it started out with, really building on Dave and his pioneering the idea in terms of biohacking. And our company started with the brain front and center. So the idea, our CEO, as an example, had kind of toasted himself. He'd worked super hard, sleep deprived, high stress, and just got brain fog. Right? He was lost productivity and realized like how important the brain was for basically making the world a better place, and thought, well, that's what we should do. We should create a company that first and foremost focuses on helping people help themselves to have more functional, higher performing brain. So that's the neurohacker piece. Like the neuro from brain, the hacker from biohacker. And then collective came in because, especially starting out, we realized, wow, there's like people like an Andrew Huberman or Dr. Dan Stickler, right? There's just these amazingly talented, right, capable men and women scattered around the country that, they're not going to uproot and come work for a new company. But wow, can we tap into their expertise and in this collective, we as smarter than me sense, bring some of what they have into what we're doing. So create basically that synergy of, outside expertise, our internal expertise, and then the last piece is citizen science. So all the people that are out there, measuring things and doing self experiments, and can we tap into that community?
I love that. And when I heard you explain it to Dave Asprey. I love that we idea. Dr. Dan Siegel came on our podcast and he talked about that idea that it's not just about me or you, it's about we, all of us together, the collective. So I love how you've brought everyone together. And that's really, in essence, what I'm trying to do on the podcast. It's over the years reaching for the best. And, so when I saw who you've got, I pretty much quoted everybody that you've got on your collective. Michael Gelb, I've put a quote from him, and Jim Quick. If I haven't had him on as a guest, I've definitely mentioned them. So it's just a powerful group that you've created over there. Very, very neat to see.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So let's get into this. So I didn't know about this topic at all before I had, done the research. I thought, well, I'm all excited about having you on. And then I actually went in and looked at, you've got products. I knew there were products, but I knew nothing about cellular senescence. So can you explain it for people that might be like me and had never heard about this from the two angles, maybe the zombie explanation for the movie experts and the gardener analogy for those who like the gardening side, just, the basics of it?
Yeah, so cellular senescence, we often talk about a model called the hallmarks of aging, which we didn't invent. Some other writers originally published in Cell, which is a prestigious journal in 2013, about these 9 characteristics that all organisms seem to have in common as they age. And actually in January, they expanded it to 12. So now there's 12. But one of the original 9 and one of the 12 is called cellular senescence. And the idea is that as we age, think of cells also aging and having a life cycle. And senescent cells specifically are cells that have been stopped from dividing. So they can't make, offspring. They can't create, daughter cells, as an example. And in theory, our immune system would just, find them and gobble them up and they would be gone. But what happens in aging is that they accumulate. So the zombie metaphor for people, the movie with Brad Pitt as an example, and I'm a big fan of that book actually, and have met the author in the past at Comic-Con way back. And but the reason behind zombie cells, that analogy, is because think of a zombie as somewhere between living and dead, right? It can't create offspring, but it's not dead either.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of a zombie is it could, infect new people and turn them into zombies. So senescent cells have that characteristic, right? They're not fully alive in the sense like they've been frozen. They can't create new offspring, which is a defining characteristic of living cells, but they haven't been killed off. And the last piece is that senescent cells secrete these compounds into the world around them, so the environment in our tissue, and those signals can turn cells nearby into new senescent cells, so they can essentially zombify otherwise healthy cells. So that's where an analogy comes from. And then we at Neurohacker tend to use much more of a gardening analogy, and part of that goes to our VP of marketing, Lauren, is loves gardening, and some of the other people on our team. So I was trying to think of a non-zombie way to communicate that to Lauren when we were developing this product. And I said, all right, well, think of like a plant, like a healthy plant, all the leaves, vibrant green, plants doing really well, but periodically, because of a pest or some other reason, a leaf will turn yellow, right? It will be somewhat damaged. And the idea is that leaf would eventually fall off the plant. And then in its place, a new, healthy, vibrant green leaf would grow. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And that's why a good gardener will periodically go out and prune their plants, right? Like prune away any of the damaged leaves. And so Senolytics, which is a term we'll get to, is basically the equivalent of the gardener pruning these senescent cells out of our tissues. So the same reason we would prune a plant, right? To get rid of a leaf that's damaged and taking up resources, allow for new growth, improve the overall vitality and health of the plant. That's the same reason that we want to prune away senescent cells. So we tend to use that metaphor a lot more at Neurohacker Collective. And the last piece of that is senescent cells, I mentioned they're kind of frozen, right? They're like, all right, we're not going to let you make any new cells. And you haven't gone, through cell death yet. You're in between. But senescent cells eventually should proceed through what's called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And apoptosis comes from a Greek word meaning falling off, but in the sense of a leaf falling off a tree or a fruit falling off a branch type of thing, right? So that's also one of the reasons we like that, leaf pruning metaphor, because the goal of a senescent cell's journey should eventually be this falling off process. And the goal of a senolytic would be something that would support it on its journey getting there because it's been stuck somewhere along the way.
So that explanation today helped me to see it in a different way, because I've been thinking about it in terms of, like, we know inflammation in our body because we feel the inflammation. We could, get up in the morning, we look in the mirror, we know there's something not right when we're off. But how do we know we have these cells that are dead in our body? Do we feel them? Can we see them? Do we know they're there?
Well, that's why I like the plant analogy as well, because if a plant just had a couple yellow leaves, I mean, who knows what the plant feels, but the plant's still going to be pretty healthy, right? It's going to do well. But at some point, it'll reach a threshold of enough yellowing leaves where the whole function of the plant will be compromised. And if we don't do something at that point as a gardener, then we'll have lost the plant. And some of the experts in the field of longevity and cellular senescence particularly think that's the same, that there's a threshold level. If it's really low in our tissues or organs, we're probably not going to experience anything. We'd still want to prune the yellowing leaves away, but we wouldn't feel consequences. But above that threshold, then we can feel all kinds of things. So one of the reasons I think the anti-aging community is most excited about cellular senescence and then strategies to remove them, so that would be the Senolytics, is that because they've just been found to contribute to so many of the things that challenge us as we get older. Like almost every tissue you can think of, the brain, the heart, muscles, joints, senescent cells seem to contribute to making it harder to perform well in those tissues.
Got it. So we've talked a lot about exercise for preventing the shortening of telomeres on this podcast. So can you orient us to where senescent cells came in to the research? I've seen you explain the years of where the research came in. Can you just give us a snapshot of the history for a second?
Yeah, so telomere attrition is one of the other hallmarks. So it's its own, one of the 12. And so we'll go, I guess, on like a journey back in time. So in 1961, and this was working like in a cell culture in a dish. This person named Hayflick, and he wasn't alone, but it was named after him, found that after a certain number of divisions, cells in that test tube would just stop dividing. They would basically freeze. So we would now call that replicative senescence, but that's where the idea of cellular senescent or senescent cell came from, was that these cells just, for some reason, after about 50 divisions, just said, hey, I'm done. I'm not going to make any new cells. And later, in the 70s, then the idea of telomeres, like that, the very ends of DNA that aren't replicated each time a cell divides. So they would have attrition. They would, each division, you'd lose a little bit more at the end. And then at some point, you'd have lost enough that the cell essentially executes, it's called a DNA damage repair program. But it says, okay, we don't want to risk copying ourselves because we may inadvertently have mutations or damage to our DNA. So let's just stop, right? So that's where like telomere attrition can lead to cellular senescence. And for a long time, that was the only connection. That was thought that, the end result of shortening telomeres over time would be cellular senescence. And that was it. Mm-hmm. I think it was in 1984, two female scientists discovered telomerase, right, which can then like lengthen a bit telomeres. And what I would say eventually came out was that all kinds of other things they found could cause a cell to become senescent way before telomere attrition did. So way before you hit the Hayflick limit, if you did things to stress that cell culture, like UV radiation or lack of nutrients, or did something to disrupt the mitochondria in those cells, it would cause what they called premature stress-induced senescence. So this is how I think the field has leaned, is that it's probably unlikely that most of what we think of as cellular senescence in an aging concept is because of telomeres shortening. It's much more because of this stress-induced premature senescence that's causing our cells to become senescent and just linger that way. So that's, I don't know if that answered the question, but in general, things that would speed up telomere attrition would also speed up senescence, because they are, like I said, somewhat interrelated.
Got it.
So exercise, as an example, is
yep.
one of the few things that's been shown in human studies and animal studies to slow the process of creating senescent cells. So in general, you can almost say, exercise slows almost all of the hallmarks of aging.
Right. And how I came across Dr. Stickler around the pandemic time was the time when our podcast took a turn right towards health and wellness. I couldn't have guests on that weren't focused this way. And that's how I met him. And he went deep into, his areas of expertise, and he held up his arm and he was wearing this Whoop device that I now don't take off. But, every single guest you learn something from, and he left his mark on me with the Whoop. But then we started to look at these top 5 health staples, and I was trying to really dive deep. It seems like exercise fixes everything. It fixes your mood, your anxiety. It just seemed to be the answer for everything. So we put that as one of the daily staples, or, something to really focus on. Then we put sleep, that we know is the foundation for our life, and then healthy diet, optimizing our microbiome. We brought in Dr. Vucic, who is a part of your collective. And then we did intermittent fasting. So if you look at, these top 5 health staples that I identified, what would you think, according to your hallmarks of aging, what are we missing from this list that you've uncovered from your work with this field?
Well, so one of the new 3 that was added to the hallmarks was dysbiosis, so gut microbiome, that like the changes in that happen with aging. So that's now part of the 12. Most of the others, like I said, they're more the characteristics of what happens in aging, as opposed to the strategies necessarily that you would do to mitigate them, right? So I know I'm just a huge fan personally of what I think of as the fundamentals. So you named most of them, right?
Right.
What you eat, when you eat, exercise, sleep, making sure you're getting enough and good quality, stress reduction. I'm mentioned when we were kicking off, that I'd go out here not too distant future and watch the sunset, right? So the timing of light exposure. So, and part of it, so in our hypothalamus, there's certain things that are, I think of them as self-regulated, right? So, appetite, so that's where food comes in, and sleep, right? That's in the hypothalamus, and sex drive, that's there, and the body clock, right? So there's your life or your light piece, and then, stress, the HPA, the hypothalamus is like super big, and the HPA axis, right? So there's these core groups of things that we evolved to have, largely self-regulated for us. Temperature and thirst are 2 other ones that are in there, and those are our biggest opportunities to, I think, change both our short-term and long-term health by doing better in those areas, because they're so important. They've all been grouped together with mechanisms in place to help, in essence, us make sure those needs are satisfied. And in the current world, often, one or more of those needs goes unfulfilled. So,
yeah, you're not the first person to remind me to add stress reduction on there. So I've definitely got to add a sixth staple and just keep learning and improving on these areas. So what would be the difference between cellular senescence and now I'm not going to say this word right, autophagy? What's the
Yeah,
difference?
no, I think that's right. So like the simple difference is cellular senescence is talking about a whole cell, and autophagy is talking largely about things inside the cell, proteins and organelles. So like inside a cell, you'll have what they call organelles, so tiny organs that do things like copy DNA, store DNA, clean things up. So autophagy is really a stress response program designed for maintenance, right? To recycle and repair individual proteins or damaged organelles. And then those component parts can be put back to use, but like, build a new protein or, make a new organelle or make more mitochondria, that type of thing. So I tend to think of things on a continuum of stress to a cell. So like just think of like I mentioned this idea of a lot of cellular senescence is stress induced, but things that would be stressful for a cell. So when a cell is stressed, the first thing it's going to try to do is toughen itself up, like get ready, right? So become resilient. So antioxidant defenses, it'll try to ratchet up how it deals with that because almost all stress causes oxidative stress. And if that's not enough and proteins start to get gunked up or organelles start to have a little bit of damage, then it'll execute the autophagy software program and say, all right, well, I'll just, maintenance, I'll just fix these things. And if damage gets to a point where, oh, maintenance isn't going to be enough, that's when cellular senescence program gets executed. It's like, okay, too much damage, too much stress. We'll just freeze this cell where it is and worry about it later. In the meantime, it's not going to make copies of itself and cause more problems. And then sometimes if there's even more damage, then a cell will just go directly to that falling off process, apoptosis. But apoptosis is also a program. It's an intentional thing. You start to see changes in cell in advance of apoptosis, where it's basically getting ready to make sure that it dies off in a way that's healthy for our tissues. And then if stress is like huge, then that's what's called necrosis, which is unplanned cell death. That's like you got bit by a snake or spider or something that caused like trauma. The tissue. So there's this continuum of how stressful something is and how the body or cells deal with it. And cellular senescence is somewhere in that middle. And autophagy would be, in a simple sense, something that would help a cell repair itself so it doesn't need to go into this senescence software program.
That's very clear. And as you were talking, I was thinking it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like if there's a cell that is cancerous, we want it to go this route, right?
Yeah, so there's like a couple points. So almost nothing is like black and white, always good or bad, right? It's context matters, right? So we tend to use this idea of transient senescent cells and lingering senescent cells. So this oversimplifies what's nuanced, but think of like transient ones that they come in, they have a purpose, they do it, and then they naturally just go through this falling off process. And lingering ones are ones that, for whatever reason, they get stuck and they accumulate over time, right? So when we that's how I partition. But there's times when the transient ones do something important. So like a classic example would be intense exercise. Intense exercise is going to create a little bit of micro trauma in that muscle. And so we would naturally create senescent cells as part of what's going to say, hey, this is, needs some tender loving care. We need to do some things to repair, heal that tissue. We need to call the immune system in because that'll gobble up some of the, anything that's damaged. And so what they've found, as an example, like in a young mouse, they'll exercise them intensely. The young mouse will create a bunch of senescent cells, but in a day or two, they're all cleared away. They've either on their own gone through this falling off process or the immune system's come in and found the stragglers. But in an older animal, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, the senescent cells that were created from that intense exercise, they're still there hanging around, causing problems. So the issue isn't per se senescent cell. It's, is a senescent cell, did it do its job? And now, you know, it's, what's that, the end by date, like the end by date happened, it's been
So,
removed, or for some reason has it figured out a way to hang around and be a nuisance. And the goal of like Senolytic strategies, things aimed at trying to remove senescent cells, isn't to do things to prevent senescence from happening when it's good. It's to specifically find these cells that are the yellow leaf equivalents that are just lingering and should have gone through this journey, and nudge them to finally go through that next step so that they'll be pruned away.
now, where would be some places where these senescent cells take hold in the body? And I'm just going to guess, would it be the places where our body hurts?
Yes. Well, so the really they found them in all tissues so
Okay.
far. The probably the number one spot where they tend to grow or accumulate is connective tissue. So fibroblasts would be the cell type, but fibroblasts are found in our connective tissue. And connective tissue is, you know, the tissue in our joints, our fat tissue. You know, it's underneath the layer of our skin. So connective tissue would be one, we feel. Another area would be the lining of our blood vessels and lymph, and then our immune system. So one of the big things that happens with aging is it's called immunosenescence, but immune cells become senescent, and then they linger, but they're not able to do, you know, the immune job anymore. So those three areas were the first three, and probably where disproportionately senescent cells were early on found to accumulate. But over time, as research has realized how important these cells are for aging, they found senescent cells in tissues that, well, I guess stepping back, have you ever heard the idea that cells turn over about every 7 years?
Yeah.
Something along those
Yeah.
lines? Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's an average, but like in some, like blood cells turn over every couple of months. Um, Cells lining our digestive tract, you know, like every 1 to 2 months. But something like our heart tissue, that turns over about every 4 decades. Muscle tissue, it's about every 15 years. Liver is about 1 to 2 years, right? So different tissues at different rates. And so early on, it was thought that senescent cells most likely were problematic in tissues that were turning over cells quicker, where now we know that they can accumulate even in heart tissue, which has a much slower turnover, or in muscle tissues, as an example. And then there's but not very many cell types that never create daughter or son cells, that they never divide. Once they're made, they're good for a lifetime. And our neurons in our brain are the classic example of that. Like we don't make new neurons. So it used to be assumed that these cells that couldn't divide couldn't become senescent, because what would be the point, right? They don't divide anyways. Why would we stop them from dividing? But now scientists realize that there's senescent cells both in the brain surrounding neurons, and that some neurons can become senescent. And going back to that idea of autophagy you mentioned, ideally, like one, we wouldn't stress our brain or our neurons too much. But if we did, that they would go through autophagy to make sure that they didn't get so much damage. And so like autophagy becomes super important for neurons, because we want to make sure we don't inadvertently create senescent ones. But so senescence can now occur everywhere, or is known to occur everywhere. Though I would say most, like if you think of some of the classic functional things with aging. So one of the struggles with aging is that our muscles tend to become weaker and smaller, even if we do good things like exercise and eat right. And in one of my favorite cellular senescence animal studies, they took young mice, they took old mice, and again, they did something that would create an anabolic signal. So the two main things that will do that is either exercise or eating like a big enough burst of protein at a meal. And what they found is that the young mice had a really good anabolic response to that signal. But the old mice didn't. They were what they called in the study anabolic resistance. So think of like the idea of insulin resistance. You have the signal, but for some reason the response to it is muted. And what they found is if they did something to clear out the senescent cells in the old mice, then they reversed the anabolic resistance, essentially rejuvenated the muscle, created a response much more like a young mouse would have. And so, that would be one area. So I know for me, I mentioned at the beginning, after we do this recording, I'm going to go out and do like heavy straps as a weightlifting exercise. So that was something I looked at. Like when I started taking Qualia Senolytic, did it unstick me from my weightlifting plateau? And how did my muscle respond to that anabolic signal compared to how they seemingly were responding before? I know one of the things Neurohacker Collective prides ourselves on before launching a product is we'll always do some kind of a small study where we'll put the product together, because we usually are using multiple ingredients, just to make sure, one, that it's safe, that it's tolerable for people, and two, we'll come up with, well, how are we going to test it? What are we going to see if we give this to people? If it works the way we hope, how will they respond? What will their benefits be? And so for this particular product, before we launched it, we recruited a bunch of people that had issues with flexibility, right? So challenges bending over, again, super common as we get older. Issues with how comfortable they could do things like going up and down stairs, going shopping, getting in and out of cars, that type of thing. And then we had them do a few cycles of this product. And a cycle for the audience is taking it for 2 days and then have a window of time that you don't take it, and then take it again for 2 days and then have a window of time. So we did 3 cycles, and what we saw was just huge improvements in this group of participants in those areas, right? So we had cherry picked a group that we thought might benefit, because that's an area that many people experience issue aging. But there's lots of areas. Skin would be another one. Like I mentioned, connective tissue, skin's one of our more important areas of connective tissue. So
interesting, and it's interesting some of the strategies that I've heard over the time from many of the people in the collective. These are the things that you notice right away. When you improve certain things, your skin right away improves. When you change and do something different, you get rid of some toxins, you can see it obviously, and people will see it in you and say, what have you done differently? You might have cut something out and it shows up. So it's interesting. I just wonder, there was something that when I was reading this stuff, it brought me back to the late 90s when I used to sell vitamins. I used to talk about this doctor that would, he had all the science behind these vitamins that got rid of free radicals. I think it was like a selenium-based product. And all these people would come and buy these vitamins from me based on this one statement, like, this is the only vitamin that gets rid of free radicals. How is this different from free radicals or oxidative stress? What's different about this than that?
Yes. So what I mentioned, like there's kind of the continuum of how cells adapt to stress in their environment. The antioxidant defenses, what I mentioned as kind of one of their first steps, right? So antioxidant defenses would be the cell's way of dealing with oxidative stress. So they'll upregulate enzymes like glutathione peroxidase and SOD, which is superoxide dismutase, and catalase, and then they'll try to make more of important antioxidant and detox compounds like glutathione, right? So our cells will try to do that for us, and as long as they have the resources to do that, it's sometimes better. Think of like exercise, right? Like the way I think of exercise is that I do, say, the weightlifting, and then my muscles get bigger and stronger because my body thinks like, oh, better be more prepared for when Greg lifts weights next time. Mm-hmm. Right? So that it's always this idea of adaptation and we want to give that trigger. We want our tissues to have the resources to then adapt. And so with antioxidants, the concern so oxidative stress is real, right? That's again something that almost all types of stress, no matter the source, whether it's like emotional stress, physical stress, chemical stress. At a cellular level, there'll be oxidative stress. That's just part and parcel of it. But then the question is it better to let the cells adapt to that, like get tougher, create their own antioxidant defenses, or should we just give them high amounts of antioxidants? And is that a better route? And I think at this point, science would be like, oh no, it's way better to do things where that they create their own antioxidant defenses. And one of the concerns about people smarter in this area than me is that if you give too many antioxidants, then cells don't need to toughen up and create their antioxidant defenses because
Oh,
we've done that for them,
I
right? So, so because of that, like that free radical theory of aging, it still hovers around, but it's not one of the main ones. The two main camps, I think, in the aging world are agings because of damage accumulation or aging is programmed. And the distinction would be so like things like autophagy and cellular senescence, those would be characteristic of we're getting older because these things related to damage aren't working as well as they do in younger cells, younger bodies. The programmed aging is this idea that evolutionarily, mammals, living organisms were designed to reproduce. Once we've reproduced, then there's almost this software program that kicks in that says, okay, you've done your job. Now we don't need to do as good a job to make sure that we persist through time. Right? So there's those two camps, and they're not mutually exclusive. And the free radical theory of aging would have been an older thing that's I think now would be thought of as part of the damage accumulation, but not a particularly nowhere near as thought to be like there's a solution like antioxidants like it would have been in that time period in the 90s. Where now Senolytics, as an example, I think it was 2015 is when Mayo Clinic and Scripps Institute of Aging coined the term senolytic. And what they had done was they had found that these compounds, when given to mice, somehow went in and eliminated some of these lingering senescent cells that had accumulated. And lo and behold, tissues rejuvenated, the older mice were healthier, they lived a bit longer. All these different areas of dysfunction were, in a sense, rejuvenated. They were more made like young mice. So antioxidants have never shown any promise in that, right? It was this theory, but in the theory, this idea of like we should just do things to stress cells, a small amount, right? Like a hormetic dose, and let them make more of their antioxidant defenses is a smarter way to go. And it's why, among some of the people that you mentioned, they do things like cold plunges and the intermittent fasting and microdosing stress, basically, to toughen themselves up.
saunas, exercise. There just seems to be a list of everything to do. And when I was listening to your interview with Dave Asprey, I love how he's always trying to biohack even what you've invented here. And, he was saying perhaps maybe for dosing, maybe in the future, could it be something that we take like every decade, or where do you see this going? Like, how have you created the dosing right now and where will it go in the future?
So with senolytics currently are done with what's often termed like a hit and run dosing. So you do a high dose of these compounds that can, help senescent cells go through this falling off process. And then you have a period anywhere from, in animal studies, it may be as short as 7 days, but in humans, it's typically no sooner than 2 weeks. And then, we usually recommend 1 month before you would do your next 2 days. So that's like, a high dose and then plenty of time between dosing. And so Dave was proposing, I wonder if we eventually will get someplace where we can extend that, interval out. And I mean, anything's possible, but I don't think it's likely with anytime soon. I think the only way to get there would be doing things that are more gene-based, potentially, right? So one of the things they've done in some animal strains is create strains of mice, as an example, that essentially have software program that will clear out senescent cells. on its own. And there's other there's some like naked mole rat would be an example, but there's certain fish, like I believe rockfish. And there's just some long-lived organisms, and often they don't create cellular or senescent cells the same way we would, as an example. And so I think, to get to Dave's promise, you'd have to live long enough for them to be able to do those kinds of gene things on humans.
Got it. Well, I've got to just give a huge shout out here to Tina Gammon on your marketing team, because just, a couple days before the interview, she sent me some of the products here to try, the Vision, Night, and Mind. And can I just tell you what I experienced? Because it was phenomenal. And I just wonder what you have to say about it, if like I'm a typical case, or, just tell me, for someone who measures everything. I took the night one last night, and I wear my Whoop. I'm fully aware. I write down my dreams, usually every morning. I had a really good sleep, felt rested when I woke up, and I had extremely vivid dreams, all in color. Is that something that you've ever heard before? Curious.
Yeah. So the Qualia night would be our recommendation is to take it at dinner, or, like about 3 to 4 hours before bed. And the idea of that product was originally, we all have pretty stressful, not all, but many of us have stressful days and trouble winding down between when we get home and when we go to sleep. And a big part of then why we have poor sleep is because they would use the word hyperarousal in sleep research, right? So like our stress system was just too on still. And so the goal of that product was to give all kinds of calming and relaxing, reishi mushroom, botanicals that have been used for that, as a means to just get someone so they could start to relax in advance of sleep, with the then idea that if that happens, they should be able to sleep better. And so yes, like sleep's the main thing that people categorize that as a sleep product, but really it's supposed to do three things. Like it was supposed to help people with that, relaxation time period leading up to sleep. And it was supposed to ideally allow them to wake up feeling more refreshed the next morning and have a more productive day. And so like when I originally we write like a product specification for new products. So when I wrote this, and as long as we do those two things and we don't mess up sleep, like we're probably good, right? And then it just turned out a lot of people like you really noticed a big impact on sleep. So, then that varies. So in one of our small studies we did on it, we had a subset of people that had something, either an Aura, a Fitbit, some type of thing, and some, my REM sleep really, was way better than I've ever had. Someone else, it might be, maybe 25% of them, oh, my deep sleep was way longer. Other people, oh, my heart rate variability number was so much better. And for me personally, when I take that, my resting heart rate, I use an Aura, but my resting heart rate across sleep will usually be a few beats per minute slower. So like my body's just more relaxed through that sleep state. So yeah, it's sleep's hard, and it's so individual, but we definitely get lots of testimonials like yours where someone will take that and notice something different. And the other thing I would just say for you, since you just started it, is that what we've routinely seen is that for sleep quality, it's better over a month than over a couple days. It's better over 2 months than over a month. Like some of those things are meant to gradually improve the systems that help our brain regulate sleep.
Well, sleep is my weakest link, so I'm definitely going to continue after this episode, and I'll do another one where I'll come back on and explain what happened and refer back to this interview, because I noticed such an impact, and I definitely felt rested. That's a big notice when you wake up. Are your eyes still tired? Do you want to go back to sleep? Or are you ready to get the day going? And definitely felt rested. And then the next one I took was the Mind. I took that the next day. I didn't do the Vision one, and I'll just tell you why. I'm right now looking at getting LASIK, so I'm wearing contacts, and I just thought, should I mess around with the vision one later, maybe after I've done LASIK, or what would be the thought on the vision? What's the goal of the vision one?
Yeah, so vision was created mostly thinking about screen time protection. And it's because a lot of us at Neurohacker are on computers a lot. Me personally, as an example, but a lot of our science team. And there's some great nutrients that help our with particularly that. So when I think of vision, like most of people think of like what you're going to do for LASIK. So that would be a
Mm,
term visual acuity, right? Like how clearly we can see a letter or a number or
right.
something like that. But vision has all kinds of different jobs, right? So it has like one of the things is, you know, peripheral vision, right? That Andrew you meant, like so doing this with my hands, I can see that movement, right? So that's has nothing to do with visual acuity. Another would be changing in intensities of light or protecting us from intense light, blue light as an example. That's so when I think of like the one vision has all these different jobs. The eyes are basically an extension of the brain, so hence the neurohacker bit. But then we have things that really are the front of the eye physiology, right? So our lens, and then we have the back of the eye, that's the retina. We have the muscles that help our eyes to focus, right, to create the visual acuity. But we also have muscles, it's called the near triad response, but basically, if there's bright light in front of us, but darkness all around us. So imagine we're laying in bed, but looking at our cell phone or a tablet, right? So that's going to cause a different dilation of the pupil than being right now with the outside light around me being bright and my computer. And so a huge chunk of vision is these small muscles, around our pupil, muscles that help us rotate our eyes. And when we're on a screen, they just all get so stressed
Mm-hmm.
because we're looking at so the back of our eye is stressed because of all the blue light and the flicker from the screen. The front of our eye because of that extra stress, right? The oxidative stress basically on the front of our eye. So a super common thing with people that use screens a lot would be something around dry eyes.
Yeah.
Either their eyes water too much or they've used that resource up and they become dry. And then their muscles get tired. They get fatigued because we're instead of our like being out in nature and our eyes shooting over here and darting all over the place, they're locked in one thing. It's like holding a weight until your muscles are trembling. So Qualia Vision was designed for those three things, like front of the eye support, back of the eye support, and to help these fatigue muscles. So the visual acuity, that's not something really supplements at least quickly do anything for, right? A few things like bilberry long enough might help some people, but these other things, most of us that are on screens need a lot of extra support. So that's Qualia Vision. So it's funny. It's one that we do the least amount promoting, but our science team, if you ask everyone science team what you take the most, it's always vision.
Oh,
So
interesting. Interesting. Because at the end of the day, my eyes are exhausted. It's like I can barely
yeah.
keep them open because this is where I hang out all day and all these screens. So I'll definitely give that one a try. And then I tried the mind one. I took it this morning and I noticed so many different things. It was clarity was the biggest one because I measure clarity on a weekly basis. I give myself a score. How clear was I um, during my day-to-day activities? So I know not clear versus clear. And it was a level of clarity, almost like when you put like new glasses on and you can see. It was extremely clear. Extremely happy. I'm always a happy person, but just like everything was going great this morning. It was the best day ever. I'm like, what is in this stuff? So is that something that you hear?
Yeah, so Qualia Mind, that was our original product. So it's that's our, flagship products to this day. The Senolytic that we spent a lot of time, that's actually been our number two selling product. But the Qualia Mind, yeah, we would use the term nootropic, but the idea of a nootropic or that term is this idea of like substances that will just help your brain perform better, but typically in areas like alertness, focus, mental clarity. Over time, memory is a lot slower. process, then like focus, you should feel, with a good nootropic that day. So yes, we get lots of people that share experiences very similar to what you have when they introduce Qualia Mind.
And I
And
read,
me too. Like I was going to say one of my early experiences, this took more than my first day, but I all of a sudden after a couple of days noticed like, wow, I really want to get into my work instead of procrastinate and
yeah,
dither. So
yeah, I read some of the testimonials just to see, am I like close to what other people are saying? And I read some people saying their intuition was improved, which I can imagine it takes some time to notice things like that. But stuff like that when you are looking at that type of thing, you would see a difference. And with working out, that oh, I've got to go to the gym, or, after a long day, it's hard to pick up your hiking shoes and it's hot outside. I'm not going to go, but you just have this little extra boost of energy, I think, to do those
and
things.
the and I think energy is the perfect word. So I use the idea of mental energy, right? But like, and Dave Asprey would talk about this in, I think it's Headstrong, his book on the brain and mitochondria. But our brain uses about 25% of all of the energy that our body produces, right? It's just a voracious consumer of energy. And neuroscience research would basically say, like, whenever we're thinking hard, so using our brain to do strenuous things, we tend to regionally deplete energy, right? So that's the limitation often on, performing better, is the brain being able to make more energy and more neurotransmitters, more of the things it uses to be able to have mental clarity and focus. And it's why, like I said, our CEO, when he decided to found the company, is like, well, you know, if we really want to make the world a better place, we've got to upgrade people's brains. We've got to give them more focus, more patience, more, creativity, the things we need in a modern world to be better versions of ourselves. And I love that you mentioned the end of the day, because that's how I think of a product like Qualia Mind. That's the silent benefit. Like most people, like notice, oh, I was more mentally clear. I had da da da. But like my goal for people is, and I'll tell a quick story about my dad. So my dad, we grew up in the suburbs of Boston. He had crazy commute. Like God bless him for doing it, because I would never want to do that commute every day. So, in a high pressure job, he was an executive at a big engineering company. So he would get home and be kind of a grouchy,
Yeah.
irritable guy for that time period when he first came in the door. Not that, we learned to be kind of on our best behavior. Because, like I had big Irish Catholic family, so there was 6 kids of varying ages. But my brother and I were a year apart, and we would often bicker, but we behaved well when my dad got home. And so what he would then often do would, shine shoes, go do, like, he had a little workbench area. He would, fiddle and have dinner. And then after that, he would have had time to recharge, for lack of a better way to say it. And he would be fun to watch TV with, and, like, good dad, right? But so my story about my dad is that he was just mentally depleted when he first got home, between the day at the office, the drive home, you name all the other things, that he just run out of mental energy and needed some time to recharge to become a better version of himself. And I think that's the truth for most of us, right? Like the best version of ourselves shows up maybe at work, but not when we walk in that door at the end of the day to spend time with our loved ones. And so when I think of a great nootropic, that's like the side effect benefit. You should get that productivity at work, but you should be a better version of yourself over time at the end of the day. And that was the other big benefit I noticed after taking Qualia Mind for a while, is I noticed that, driving home in a bit of traffic, I would just have way more tolerance and patience for that. If I met people to do trivia at a bar, I could deal with the irritations there much more readily. Anyways, I would say yes. For me, that's a huge thing to pay attention to, whether it's Qualia Mind or some other cognitive product. Is that helping you to be the best version of yourself, not just immediately after it, but later in the day, which is often the most important time, because that's when we're, around the people that our behavior is going to impact the deepest.
Yeah, I'm the crankiest at 8:15 at night when I've got to pick up my kids from gymnastics, and I go to bed so early because I wake up early just from, the heat in Arizona. You got to get an early start to the day. But 8:15 at night, if I could be a nicer person, because it's a tough time. It's like I just want to get home and get to sleep. And, they're still up and excited and want to tell you all about their moves and whatever they mastered. And if I could give myself a little bit more compassion and understanding at that time of night, I can see how I'd be a better person for sure. As we wrap up, there's been so much that you've taught me here, but what would be one thing that you hope our listeners would take away from this episode on your work over the years of Senolytic Cells, of Neurohacker Collective? What's, just wrap it all up, something we can all know about to optimize our health and longevity right down to the cellular level? What would you say?
So I'm like I said, a big fan of what Qualia Senolytic can potentially do, in part because it's really easy. It's just a 2-day a month. You take, 6 capsules a day. So it's a pretty, large amount of capsules those 2 days. But I think of it as an investment into both improving short-term, like how we're functioning if there's an impairment, but also to make sure that we're healthier and more vibrant going through the decades. Because I'm 61 now, so I have quite a few friends that just aren't able to do anywhere near what I can currently do, or older loved ones that for decades haven't been able to do much. And I would want for them what I want for me, which is to be able to continue to enjoy my life as the decades progress. And I think Qualia Senolytic of our products is the best investment in that. And the only other thing I would say is, add stress to your list, because I think stress is just a crazy important fundamental that makes almost everything else so much more challenging. And I think stress is also fairly misunderstood. But Selyate was the researcher that coined the idea of physiological stress. And by the end of his research, what he had felt was that in humans, at least, the biggest stressor by far was mental and emotional stress. So, and I think many of us, if we don't have it, we're exposed to it. So creating tools or strategies to take that stress either off the menu or to minimize it, I just think are so important for staying healthy. I know when I was more actively seeing patients, if stress was super high, you'd often see that right before some health took a nosedive. So, the time to make sure we don't do the nosedive is in advance. So I think of like Senolytic on a cellular level helps get rid of cells that are too stressed, but anything we can do to make ourselves more resilient to stress in advance of it occurring, because we're going to be blindsided by something stressful that we didn't take into account. So we want to, as best as possible, build that resilience in advance.
Well, this has been extremely eye-opening and powerful. Dr. Kelly, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I was so excited to meet you today, to dive deeper into this topic, and to think about how I'm going to implement these groundbreaking products into my day. For people who want to try, I was thrilled to see that your team actually created an affiliate link and a coupon code. They just click on the link and they put the code Neuroscience, and that gives them 15% off the purchase. So thank you so much for that for our audience. And I want to thank you again for spending some time on your Friday night with me here, educating me to help others to really understand this topic and what's out there for us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you.